Dad, we are now a quarter into 2026.
Mhm.
It's been a bit of a crazy year. And I don't think it's been the year that maybe a lot of investors, myself certainly, have maybe expected, especially coming out of 2025.
I agree. Yeah. The end of the year, we're kind of looking ahead, and the talk of the town was we're going to get some rate cuts, fairly early on in the year. That certainly hasn't materialized. Yeah, the Fed's been way more cautious than we would have liked them to have been, but a lot of different things. It's been a bit crazy.
We're seeing some inflation as well that we want to talk about. A ton of, global current events in the market. Well, anyways, to this video, we're going to cover that today. Talk about what investors need to be aware about. I want to thank Harvest ETFs for sponsoring this video. More on that later. But Dad, what are some of the things that we're going to be covering today?
Well, Brandon, we're going to cover 5 main topics. The first one is, we're going to cover about the Fed and just sort of why the expectations for those rate cuts have dropped from pretty standard across the board to 2, down to, in some cases now, people are predicting 0 rate cuts going forward. We're going to do a bit of a gut check with the market, right? We saw a pretty significant correction back in March. Major indices dropped to 10% officially into correction territory. So we're going to cover that off there. Now, something I've covered on the channel before, I don't think you have, Brandon, but is the private credit markets and the stress we're seeing there. There has been a bit of a meltdown that's happened, and I think I don't think people are giving this enough attention. It reminds me of kind of the 07, 08 time period, and we all can sort of think about what happened there. The AI kind of reality shift that we're seeing right now, when we look at the sell-off, it's been very much driven there. A lot of people were putting money in, just sort of buying that AI dream. But now they're starting to get down to brass tacks and say, is this really a good trade? Are they going to do what they're promising? And then lastly, I want to finish off with an economic news story, but it's just the red flags that we're seeing in the manufacturing sector, or the manufacturing space. And there's a new durable goods report that's just out, and we've had 3 straight months of some, negative numbers. And so I want to cover that off and sort of tell you what I think what impact that might have. That's what we're going to go through, Brad.
Sounds like we got a pretty gloomy video coming up with what we're going to be talking about here. Pretty gloomy state of the world. Well, Dad, why don't we kick it off? Topic number 1.
Okay, sounds good. And topic number 1 is inflation, the delayed rate cuts that we've seen. And the real story here is what expectations this is setting for the rest of the year. Because when you get starting off on a rough foot like this, it is not something that we would have liked to have seen. The Federal Reserve here, their hands maybe kind of tied. As I mentioned, going into the year, people were pretty optimistic about potential rate cuts there. When you get the rate cuts, why are they so important? Well, basically they're fuel for the markets, right? They make borrowing cheaper. They boost valuations. Pretty much every sector across the board benefits from the reduced rates there. And importantly here, of course, we haven't seen what we were expecting, but it's not like the Fed have really changed direction. They've more just hit a pause button. And that's really where we're at right now. Essentially, inflation has stayed very stubbornly above that 2% target that the Fed has. And an article that came out in January by JP Morgan, it sort of captured the story. They said they actually quoted Jerome Powell himself, where he said, it was hard to look at the data and say that policy is significantly restrictive right now. In other words, the Fed didn't feel like it was, pumping the brakes hard enough to justify easing up. And even the analysts at the Fed, they were saying they were sort of pushing the rate cuts back, perhaps to about the middle of the year. Now, when we got to the end of the quarter, so about late March, that timeline was pushed back even further. Fed's own projections by JP Morgan's analysts, they expect those now possibly to be no cuts in 2026.
Yeah.
And Morningstar covered that. In a report, they said the range of possibilities certainly includes no rate cuts in 2026. Now, back in January, the market had priced in 2 rate cuts for 2026, and that, as of yesterday afternoon, was pared down to 1 and edging closer to 0 rate cuts in terms of market expectations. So in this short period of time, we've gone from those higher expectations down to essentially 0 cuts, maybe never in the course of this year. And that will cut basically through every other story that we're going to be covering in the video today. So topic 2 we're going to talk about here is the equity market correction. I'm going to hand that over to you, Brandon, to share your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that is good framing because, yeah, you're right. That does cut through the rest of the stories. But to take a look at essentially what we've been seeing in the stock market, what we've been feeling as investors, I'm sure we've all been feeling it. as we know, we had a very strong 2025, Dad, but both the S&P and NASDAQ essentially ran into what feels like a wall, right? NASDAQ 100, which of course tracks the big tech names, that's dropped more than 10% from its peak, as you mentioned at the top, officially in correction territory. S&P not far behind. The Dow did happen to fare a bit better, but still not a pretty picture. Article here from Fortune magazine captured the mood quite bluntly. This is backdated March 27th, excuse me. The NASDAQ 100 has now fallen 10% from its peak, technically entering correction territory. S&P has been at a loss for 5 weeks, on pace for its longest streak of weekly losses since 2022, Dad.
5 consecutive losses, the worst run since 2022. That's pretty big news, I would say, for the first quarter of the year. Obviously, the Iran war was a big factor. The price of oil jumped up, above $110 a barrel there. So that is, I think, the biggest driving factor. Although I think we're going to discuss a little bit later that it's not the only factor.
No.
What's important to understand here and always remember, Brandon, is that corrections are not abnormal, right? They're part of this journey that we go on. They do happen. The question I think we're hearing right now is, okay, we're in this turmoil. Is this sort of part of that normal sequence, the normal experience, or are we actually going into something worse? Now, on that note, the ECB President Christine Lagarde, she said in a Fortune article, the markets are overly optimistic about the conflict's fallout, calling it a shock probably beyond what we can imagine at the moment. So those are pretty strong words, right? Probably beyond what we can even imagine. So it kind of gets to the core of what we're seeing here. The market wants to believe, we all would like for this to be a temporary thing, but when you look at the data, it's sort of pushing it back against that narrative. So that's something we have to, I guess reality can jump up and strike us from time to time if we're not careful with that.
That's true. But you know what I find ironic here, Dad, is like, while the markets have been in this correction in general, the force that drove these markets lower, that's actually helped out one, major sector and it's made it significantly richer. While the NASDAQ was falling, as you mentioned, oil was spiking. Dad, energy had one of its best quarters in years. And actually, I think this is a perfect tie to one of the funds from the video sponsors. So thank you again, Harvest, for sponsoring today's video. But this is ticker HPF. For those that want to take a look, this is the Harvest Energy Leaders Plus Income ETF. This fund holds 20 large global energy companies. You'll see the names on the screen, but we're talking here the Chevrons, the Shells, the Suncor, the Exxon Mobils. And a couple key features about this fund in particular is it's an equal weighted fund designed for consistent monthly income stream. You'll see here, there's high quality energy companies across the board, and it is available in hedge as well as in USD. And on top of course, the price appreciation from all things discussed, a cover call strategy is overlaid true to Harvest fashion, which generates the monthly income. This fund is currently yielding to 7.87%. So certainly an interesting one to take a look at that's exposed to the sector here, while of course generating that additional cash distribution on top. Dad, let's move on to topic number 3, which is that private credit stress you've been speaking on.
Yeah, I've covered this a bit on our channel and in our Pulse newsletter. I think that this might actually be the most important story of the quarter itself, as I see some embers burning down there. It speaks to the structure, essentially, of the financial markets. And I'm not saying I'm worried yet, but something that we all should be paying attention to. So private credit. So this is basically that are loans that are made by large investment firms instead of the traditional banks, right? So it's private money instead of the traditional bank money. And it has been one of the hottest spaces, the hottest markets in the past decade or so. It's something that most of us don't really get involved in directly, so it kind of flies under the radar. We got firms like Apollo, Blackstone, Ares, Brookfield, KKR, a lot of others. They have raised hundreds of billions of dollars now from investors who are chasing higher yields that they can get on the broad market. But coming out of Q1 2026, that we just passed there, investors are starting to ask for their money back, and in large numbers, right? What's happening here, Fortune ran a major investigation on this in March. The numbers here are striking. They called it a $265 billion private credit meltdown. Apollo, Blackstone, Ares, and these other companies, they've collectively received over $10 billion, I believe it is, in withdrawal requests. Now, a senior editor at Fortune, they framed it this way: it resembles a run on a bank. That's Matt Swain. He's the co-head of equities at investment bank Houlihan Lokey. So this is a big structural problem that I don't think is getting enough attention. These funds hold long-term, illiquid for the most part funds, but they promised investors that there will be these periodic windows where they can say, hey, I want some of my money back and get it there. But the problem hits here when too many people want their money back at the same time. You get a mismatch, right? They're prepared to send some money back, but not much. They actually capped, this is Apollo, they capped withdrawals in March, and they paid investors 45 cents on the money that they had requested. The Gray Journal, they reported private credit default rates have climbed to 5.8% as of March 2026, the highest level in years, according to Fitch Ratings, with AI disruption eroding the value of software company borrowers. Now, Blackstone's CEO, John Gray, he pushed back. I mean, it's not a one-sided trade out here, but he said that this is not sort of a flaw in the system. It's done by design. And Fortune quoted him as saying that the withdrawal caps are really a feature, not a bug in these products. What you're doing is trading away a bit of liquidity for higher returns. And inherently, that is true, right? You have the higher returns for the illiquidity, but you got this $265 billion in market cap that has been now erased across these firms just in the last little while here. So I think it's not disingenuous necessarily, but it's pretty hard to call that anything other than the stress test that we're really seeing right now. And I think that the market wasn't prepared for that. And that's why we're seeing these caps. So, when you give people money, when you borrow money, when they borrow your money, you expect to be able to get it back. And that's not something that we are seeing now. So this is an area here that we've just started to hear more and more about, but I think you're going to be hearing more about it as the year progresses. So that's topic number 3 I thought was worth mentioning, and I'll hand it over to you, Brandon, for topic number 4.
We've got to talk about AI, Dad. And what we've been seeing here, this is one that basically over the past couple of years, very dear to investors' hearts, because any stock you touch did well. Any company involved with AI or mentioning, AI, artificial intelligence, hey, they got rewarded. NVIDIA, Microsoft, of course, being the hyperscalers where valuations were up, basically on the whole buzz of the field. In 2026, Dad, that mood has slightly shifted, I'd say. Actually, Market Minute described the change in sentiment quite perfectly here. The euphoria that pushed the index past the 25,000 point mark just a few months ago has been replaced with a show me attitude, with the market participants demanding tangible returns on massive infrastructure investments. They then went on further, describing what companies are now being judged on. Companies are no longer being rewarded for simply mentioning AI on the earnings calls. Instead, they are being scrutinized for their ability to turn massive R&D spending into bottom line profits. And I think, Dad, the numbers back this up. I mean, for example, here's Microsoft up on the screen, down 23% on the year. This is dated at the end of March. Capital started flowing out of these mega tech companies, really, and into, as mentioned, some of these other sectors, industrials, energy, even the value stocks, seen a nice run up there. Here's a follow-up piece later that framed this broader shift. After billions of dollars in capital expenditures were poured into AI infrastructure throughout 2024 and 2025, investors have moved from buying the dream. And I think, Dad, that's really like the key phrase. That's the one that stands out. Show me the margins. Like, I don't think anybody is here to argue that the tech is not real and is not legit. The opportunity is not real. We all understand that. But I guess, maybe we have entered a bit of part of the cycle where that enthusiasm, that early enthusiasm may be pulling back a bit. Mm-hmm. And investors, like I said, are demanding some more of the earnings, right? Hey, show me the margins.
I think so. Show me the money, Brandon.
Show me the money.
That's what it's all about.
That's it. Well, hey, this is a good transition into what another one of Harvest ETFs is designed for. Let's dive into ticker HTA, the Harvest Tech Achievers Growth and Income ETF, which holds 20 large cap tech companies, names like NVIDIA, and Microsoft, and Apple, Meta, AMD, Broadcom. You'll see them up on the screen. Since inception, here's a fun stat for you guys. $100,000 investment has grown to $290,314, including cumulative distributions. Now, a few key features about this fund. You got the broad diversification, all core large cap companies. You got the equal weighting, so removes any huge bets or skews to one or the other. And as usual, you got the covered call overlay, which generates the monthly income, currently at the 10.8% yield, and reduces the portfolio's volatility in a choppy market. So Dad, I know a way that a lot of investors would view this is, if you are a believer in some of these companies, these big tech giants, understanding and almost expecting there may be a bumpy road ahead, a fund like HTA, it gives you a way to stay invested while receiving some distribution, some income along the way while we get through this period.
Yeah, absolutely well said, Brandon. It's a bumpy road, but there's the possibilities there. The potential is so good. I want to take over, I guess, for a minute here, Brandon. I want to talk about the next topic that we're covering today. And this is another one of those ones that, the way I think in economic terms, because that's the driver of the economy. And it is the weakening U.S. manufacturing data. And this is kind of running a bit in the background, but for several months now. And I've covered this. If you don't subscribe to my Pulse newsletter, I'll put a link in the description here because I talk about this type of thing all the time. And it's so important. It's been flashing at least yellow flags. And the government's durable goods report, some of you may have never heard of it before. This tracks the orders that are placed with manufacturers for things like machinery, vehicles, industrial equipment, the big ticket items. It came in for February and it was not very pretty. Orders fell 1.4% in February. And Marketplace, NPR's business program, they made an observation that they covered in the report. They say it is the third straight monthly decline, and that is a pattern that predates the war in the Middle East. And that is a significant nuance here, because this means that the weakness wasn't caused by what you're just speaking about a few minutes ago, Brandon, the oil crisis. It was already there, right? The geopolitical situation that we're seeing has just made it worse. But this wasn't, we're thinking, oh, oil's caused everything. That's not the case. Now, Oxford University's lead economist, Bernard Yarrow, said the trajectory for capital spending by businesses is not going to be as robust as it would have been in the absence of all the geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. So that does actually come into play here. And you look at those combined, and the picture, like I said, I'm just going to call it yellow flags. And there's a supply chain professor at Arizona State that put the overall picture in some very direct terms. At this moment, we are barely holding our head above water. Here's the sort of the dilemma or the bind that this all creates. When we have weak economic data, weak manufacturing, generally it means that the economy is slowing, right? That's why it's happening. That would normally give the Fed reason to cut rates to help them along. Same time though, if you following inflation rates at all, we're seeing inflation that's running way hotter than they would like. So you've got slow growth on one hand, you've got that sticky inflation on the other hand. When you look at this combination, it is the dreaded combination that the Fed has to try and figure out, but that is in fact exactly what they are dealing with now. So I wouldn't ignore this durable goods report. It's just one of many reports coming out that is pointing to some potential trouble ahead. So that would be the fifth thing that I think a key takeaway that I have from the first quarter of 2026. And that's kind of really a summary for the whole quarter, isn't it?
Well, you had to pick 5 pieces, and there's no shortage of stuff to cover. But I think that hopefully this was valuable. Where, like you said, for the average person, it can be challenging to keep up with all of these different pieces. So, if you guys found it valuable to kind of have, I guess, a summary of what we think investors do need to be aware about, let us know down in the comments section below. Dad, any final words?
Well, before we go, I would like just again to say thank you to Harvest ETFs for supporting this video. We really appreciate that. As always, we appreciate you watching the video. There's links down below for everything that we talked about. Thanks for joining us for this review, and we'll see you in the next video.